Yeah, Corey did have a lot to say. Mostly what we talked about was theology. And he's got some deep Christian theological grounding. So he was a joy to talk to. We also talked about you, or touched on you. He said, "Oh, you gotta get Bryan on," So here we are. So why don't you introduce yourself?
My name is Bryan Braddock. I'm born and bred in Florence, South Carolina. 48 years old and married to my wife Tracy. We have 5 daughters: Hannah, Haley, Hayden, Holly, and Hope.
Wow.
Yep, full house.
Nice.
We've been married since '96, so we're coming up on 25 years in May. We'll be married 25 years in May. Currently, I'm working as the executive director of the House of Hope, a local homeless ministry here in Florence, serving the PD area. Graduate of Francis Marion University with a degree in economics, a minor in English literature. So you're like, well, how does that translate to homeless ministry? Well, I'm sure we'll probably talk about some of that path.
Oh, yeah.
You never know where you're going to end up when you're in college trying to figure it all out.
Economics and homelessness are inextricably linked.
Right. Well, there's definitely, a connection there. And got a burden for the community in a political sense a couple of years ago, and been pursuing that unsuccessfully thus far. But, well, I guess that depends on how you gauge success. I've met a lot of...
You've touched a lot of hearts in your campaign, and not everything that makes sense always ends up being right, and you made a lot of sense.
Right.
Democracy has its fix.
Politics, I was telling my wife today, we were actually having a conversation today, it's almost like gymnastics, where you do this performance and then someone judges you, and they put up their scorecards. Well, it's not always the best person, the best candidate. There's so many different factors that go into that, and I felt like I was the best candidate. I feel like I'm the best candidate in this election, but we'll see what happens.
And you are running for city council now, right?
Correct. Yes, sir.
Right. And I actually think Florence is kind of I like Florence. See, I moved here from Florida and all over Florida. So I get like varying degrees of crazy. That's like the crazy state. That's our major export, oranges and craziness. And
it's so diverse. Yeah, I mean,
Florida,
from Key West to Jacksonville, I mean, there's so much, a lot of differences.
It's like Little Cuba and then Machine Guns, Meth, and Jesus out in the boonies. And not in that order necessarily.
Right.
But
and then the Panhandle's like a whole separate country.
Oh, yeah. And there's Key West, which is like, it depends on what season, what season you're in the Keys. It goes from more like the boonies to more like San Francisco, depending on the season. So all the snowbirds come down. So it's a crazy state. I prefer the pace of Florence better. Florence is a very common, like not common, but in a sense common, but an average town, right? You get a good sampling of people. And
it's a 2020 version of Mayberry, I feel like.
Mayberry.
Yeah, Andy Griffith show. Mayberry.
I'm oblivious to TV.
Yeah. So it's got a small town feel where you'll go into the grocery store and you'll see 10 people that you know, but it's big enough where it's just that right feel. It's not huge traffic. Yeah.
And it is large enough to where you get to experience, and this is maybe true of everywhere, we tend to conflate the exceptional and the profound. The exceptional is not necessarily profound. If you meet someone who is in some lofty role in society, you may very well be underwhelmed. They are more often than not, a fairly run-of-the-mill person in an extraordinary spot. But I believe in the latent greatness in humans. The person behind the cash register when you check out under the right circumstances could have been the person to do SpaceX and do all the Elon stuff. I do fundamentally believe that. I don't think that when we get hung up on someone, we really get hung up on that role that the someone does.
Right.
And people are more interchangeable than that, I believe. Anyway, I say that every time.
No, I agree with that 100%. I mean, and you find people that's transpired, people that were living in their cars, and selling shoes,
I didn't sell shoes, I did live in the car.
End up being, the owner of Nike, I mean, just crazy scenarios like that. So
There's a good overlap between people who end up rising to greatness and how deep they've been close to the rock bottom. Mm-hmm. There's a big overlap between those two. I think that, oftentimes the tallest tree has the deepest roots. So you find that pattern in people a lot.
Yeah, and a lot of times I've met several people that have had this scenario in life, myself being one, where you get stripped down to the basic fabric of who you are mm-hmm. through circumstances. And I mean, although the circumstances just suck in the process, that understanding of who you are unlocks so much more potential. Not just who you are. For me, from a faith-based perspective, it is who I am in Christ. Once you get down in all those titles and roles and everything, mm-hmm. you strip down and you find yourself at the bottom, and you're like, gosh, none of that stuff really matters. All that stuff that I was worrying about doesn't really matter. This matters. So I think that's what happens is you find out what matters mm-hmm. at the bottom, and then it frees you up.
Absolutely. And all these other things you kind of get that these are worldly, like Monopoly pieces. It all goes back in the box when you're done. So, right. You can't distinguish between like a lofty man and a poor man when you're looking at bones. So, yeah, that's true. I do think that oftentimes on your rock bottom, depending on where it is, the presence of comfort is not necessarily peace, and the absence of comfort is not necessarily suffering. And oftentimes, in really humble settings, there's an awful lot of peace to be found. And a lot of people that I've talked to that have experienced homelessness willfully, usually. Mm-hmm. Unwillful homelessness is seldom a good experience, but willful homelessness, a lot of people look back to that and see it as a more peaceful time, less hectic, less distractions, less material to worry about. And there's a guy that I work with now that's an IT consultant of mine who chose to live in a tent to reinvent himself. And he says he misses the tent.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I found out when I was homeless for that week in Augusta, what I found in the community is that once you strip away what kind of car you drive and what neighborhood you live in and what kind of clothes you have on and all those, all that fakeness.
Yeah, the distractions.
All those distractions. Mm-hmm. And then you're just who you are. That community, it's great because you don't have to put on any pretense.
That's true. You can be a lot more genuine. That's my one rule for the podcast, though, by the way, is that this has to be genuine. There's no performances here. Other than that, anything flies. So,
good rule.
Yeah, that's kind of the rule for life. I'm not a rule follower by respect for the rules. And we can talk about theology if you'd like, though lately I've just been harping on that with everybody. Right. But having observed the love of Christ, you precipitate out from that observation a set of moral values that translates well into moral code. Moral code by itself is circumstantial, mm-hmm. and you can invalidate it with reason, right? So for an example of moral code, this is one that I brought up with Corey Dixon, was Corey actually brought this up. Yeshua of Nazareth was being criticized by the Pharisees for doing too much on the Sabbath, and he mentioned, with reason, that the Sabbath is for the man is not for the Sabbath, right? So that's a piece of moral code that was there for one or two reasons, or possibly good reasons, but incidentally, there's no way to... Morality and moral code by itself is not a way to be a loving person. And being a loving person oftentimes puts you at incidental odds with law or moral code. Oftentimes, it might not be a bad law. It might just be that under certain circumstances, in pursuit of love or a greater value, it's not reasonable. And that's how we are as a country. We bicker about our laws when we make appeals to reason, and then we get really upset when the appeals to reason are ignored. So That's kind of my outlook on morality. I see morality as pursuant of reason, and that as being completely separate from being a witness to the love of Christ.
There's got to be some. It can't be just in the rules,
Right.
Yeah, and I say rules without relationship leads to rebellion. So and that's what happens with the people. Rules, without morality. If you just, that's what we try to do in society. Is whatever society decides is right or wrong is how we determine our laws. Yeah. But society is an ever-shifting,
right.
Ever-shifting thing.
Very circumstantial.
Yeah,
right?
Very circumstantial. So, without the love of Christ being that, because that is consistent. That's a consistent.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. So, if you base morality on a consistent basis, then, obviously you're going to experience that. But society can't do it. We're forever changing laws. We thought that. Marijuana, selling marijuana or smoking marijuana, had this
evil connotation.
So we created all these laws, and the laws and the punishment.
Far outweighed.
Yeah, far outweigh. Even in my eyes, I'm a recovering addict. But when I see someone, doing 20 to 30 years because they had a pound of marijuana.
That lets you know right away it was not about the marijuana.
Right.
And marijuana itself is a propaganda term. I call it by its actual name, cannabis. Like, we live in a country where our founding documents are printed on cannabis paper.
Right.
Thomas Jefferson had cannabis farms. All of them did. They they made it to make clothes, paper, rope, all kinds of stuff.
Like you talked about economics and homelessness.
Yeah, okay.
The economics, that goes into our laws too. The economics of, is it better financially for the government for this to be illegal, or is it better for it to be legal? Once the economic shift occurs, where, oh man, we'd be better off to tax this, than to penalize and criminalize this. There's more money in taxing it than there's this. All of a sudden, it's not bad anymore.
That is kind of true, but the thing is that the laws in the government are made up, are de facto decided by a select few people. It's a minority. That's the nature of power. Power is by nature a fool's game. You cannot do net good with power. It's like going to a casino and expecting to come out on top. The house always has an advantage. Don't mess around with power. Power is de facto making someone do something they otherwise wouldn't. It's forceful by nature. So even if you use power for a good ends, like I'm going to feed the hungry, you're going to necessarily have to take more from other people to provide for that. So you end up taking a net loss to achieve a smaller ends. If it was an actual good thing, you wouldn't need to use power to do it. People would do it.
They would just do it on their own.
Right. They would do it on their own, and you would not need to coerce people. So it's unsurprising that appeals for good moral behavior in the game of who gets power tends to favor somewhat underhanded tactics. Not even somewhat underhanded. Like, everyone knows from history that the struggle for power is not a righteous process. So that's we try the best we have with democracy, and democracy has its flaws as well. Even when it was invented, Socrates was killed. Was it Socrates or Aristotle? I think it was Socrates. One of the great Greek philosophers was killed by an angry mob for corrupting the youth by teaching them philosophy, and they voted on killing him. So,
well, at least it was an electoral process.
Yeah, electoral. We elect this guy to die.
Everybody had a say in it, right?
Yeah, everyone had a say, right? But that's
except for the guy dying.
Yeah, except for that, right? So that's one of the things that I like to stress on people civically is, like, we're a republic and not a democracy. We are a democratic republic. That's a flavor, like vanilla ice cream is a flavor of ice cream. Mm-hmm. I remember getting in this argument with my econ teacher in high school. Good guy, Mr. Riplinger, very good guy. Didn't go so well because he's very, he had a classroom to run. But I said, look, we're a democratic republic. That's a flavor that's like vanilla ice cream. Vanilla ice cream is a great ice cream, but if you eat vanilla by itself, that is, one, toxic. If you drink more than a few ounces of that, you're going to have a bad time, and it's gross. Like, it smells nice, but it's really gross when it goes going down. So similarly, a democratic republic, a rule of law and the rule of what's right, as determined by a democratic process, is a pretty well designed system. It's a system, and I believe, of maybe the least of all possible evils so far as we've been able to design it. But it is not a democracy, and nor should it be. We shouldn't look at the democratic process and think that necessarily makes a better ends than the rule of what's right, because you get into all these other exploits like public misconception. You can exploit public misconception, and you can generate public misconception. We have this, we had a term of fake news being thrown around on both sides of the aisle. So if you have a large, wide swaths of the population where you allow a select few to determine what they know to be true and what they don't know to be true, then you have opened Pandora's box. If your only stopgap is democracy, if the majority rule on everything, and you have a way for a minority of people to sway the majority to have misconceptions, then you're giving, by proxy, you're giving rule to that minority. It's whatever that minority decides to design or engineer out of society.
Right.
So that's one of the moral perils of democracy. There are many more, but that's one of them.
Well, we find ourselves in that right now.
Yeah.
Full blown.
Well, on both sides. I don't believe that that's a strictly Democrat or Republican thing. There's misconceptions that people have on everything. And there's reasons why they have those misconceptions. They're not stupid people. It's just, people get caught up. I'm surely no exception to this. There's surely misconceptions that I have. But, I mean, like, when you look at the actual economic structure of the United States and our pursuit of empire as of late, it's been 2 generations so far, you kind of begin to see why the whole world's economic model looks a lot like musical chairs. And it's just this losing game for increasingly more and more people. There's not enough capital to underwrite the liability that we've generated for ourselves.
Well, it's one of the biggest reasons for homelessness.
Yes.
When people say, Brian, what's the biggest reason for homeless? They want to hear drug addiction. They want to hear, mental health. They want to hear domestic violence, things like that. And those are all, things. But what our economic structure and what we consider a home, and what we have done, in terms of, codes and regulations and this and that and the other, in that process is creating homeless people, affordable housing, the lack of affordable housing. But, 200 years ago, if you had a log cabin, a one-room log cabin with a fireplace,
you're set.
You're set.
Fireplace? Holy moly.
You had a home.
Yeah.
That was your home.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's got to be 3-bedroom, 2-bath, $150,000, or something like that, to be a home. So it's what we consider a home. I know a lot of homeless people that would not consider themselves homeless. I met a guy who lived across the street from Lowe's in a little patch of woods, and he had his shower set up, and he had his bed, and he had his whole deal. Mm-hmm. And we were out, trying to meet people and invite them, do an outreach for our homeless shelter. And I was like, so we'll call him Joe. I said, so, hey, Joe, we're out here. We're trying to, reach out to people and let them know, what we have available. We work with the homeless. And he goes, oh, yeah, I see homeless people all the time. Yeah, I know several homeless people. Let me get your information. I'll give it to them. And he's living in a patch of woods in a self-made log cabin.
Flagrantly illegal.
Yeah, completely illegal.
Right.
Off the grid. No,
right.
But because he doesn't have, that's his home. That's where he goes. That's his safe haven.
Right.
But because he doesn't have running water or he doesn't have electricity, and because all these
more
things.
Than that, because he doesn't have social permission to live there. That's why it's not a home.
Right. He's homeless.
And look, it goes back to this musical chairs thing, right? People like to blame drug addiction, which is really like a co-symptom of homelessness. The answer to the game of musical chairs isn't that the slow people have to run faster. You can't just come at me and be like, hey, look, if everyone was fiscally responsible, none of this would happen. That's not how the game plays out. There's more debt circulating. There is money to pay it off. There's going to be people who default. It's baked in. You can't get rid of it. Right. It's going to ever increase.
There's a lot of very fiscally responsible people living on the West Coast, but because a 2-bedroom apartment costs $500,000, they can't afford it.
Right.
So
right.
I mean, they're doing 5 and 10 times better than most people on the East Coast, but because of that, because it doesn't matter if you're playing musical chairs and everyone's fast.
Right. It doesn't matter.
Even the least fastest person or the slowest person among the fast people, is out. Well, on the West Coast, that person can make $100,000 a year and
easy.
be out.
You need to make about $160,000 a year to be like minimal low class in San Francisco.
On the East Coast, you're making $160,000. In Florence, South Carolina, you're living in one of the better neighborhoods.
Yeah, you are.
Right.
Right. So that goes back to the musical chairs thing, exactly like you said. That is not hard to get around. It's impossible. So here's the other thing that's really scary is that central banking, as unsustainable as it is, it might still yet be like the least of all possible evils. I can't think of a monetary system that doesn't have that kind of stuff baked in. So if you back everything by gold, you still run into the same issue. I don't see that crypto is the answer to that because it does tend to, money begets money. So you end up with this consolidation strategy where eventually things consolidate to this ridiculous level where you get vast inequality.
Well, I think all money is fiat money.
Yeah.
All money, the value of anything is, whether it's gold, whether it's silver, whether it's the U.S. dollar, is based on my belief of its value and your belief of its value.
The agreement. Yeah,
as long as we're in agreement that this bottle cap right here is worth $1, then I can give it to you and you'll give me 6 eggs.
Right.
And you can give it back to me and I'll give you, 5, bushels of bananas or whatever.
That is ultimately principally true. There may be some gray areas like that with that. What really underwrites the U.S. dollar is the ability for countries to purchase oil. All of the oil in the world, all the OPEC trades in the USD. We will go to war to ensure that. That underwrites the whole global common marketplace. If the USD is challenged as the world reserve currency or the world's exchange currency between governments, then the whole idea of global cooperation becomes not just challenged but threatened. Right. So if you look at America's foreign policy, Saddam Hussein was a total son of a gun to many people for many years, but he flirted with the idea of trading Iraqi oil on the euro. Well, we killed him. Gaddafi started trading Libyan oil with gold. We killed him.
Right.
Now, Chavez has been a strongman, so we had to wait until he died naturally, and then we expected that we would be able to jackal out Maduro during the regime change. We tried. The way we try is the reality of any oil-producing country is that oil is in essence plentiful enough to where any oil-producing country can satisfy global demand in and of itself. The whole reason why you start a cartel is because you have that situation where anybody can put the price of your commodity or your shared commodity through the floor. So unsurprisingly, the United States can do that. We can frack wells as well and drive the price of oil down below $40 a barrel, sometimes negative in certain parts of the supply chain.
Right.
Like we saw that last year, actually. Right. But we put the price of oil below Venezuela's break-even point during the regime change to jackal out Maduro. It did not work, or it hasn't yet to work, largely because we didn't have the political will to
Just stick it out.
Right, because Trump didn't listen to anyone. Listen, Trump does not listen to the military-industrial complex and the oil barons.
Right.
He doesn't listen to anybody, so we couldn't get him out. It might change now, but these low gas prices are a consequence of that. And because the United States has been ambiguous with whether we're going to get Venezuela into the OPEC folds or not, the rest of the OPEC countries have started screwing with us, because Saudi Arabia's break-even point for oil is like theoretically around, no one knows what Saudi Aramco's break-even point is. I don't think they do. It's very low. So they started producing. Russia started producing. So it becomes this race to the bottom where they're trying to put pressure on our oil country or our oil companies. So anyway, how it works is, like, let's say, and this also explains other aspects of economics. Let's say that Barbados and Saudi Arabia want to trade. Barbados wants to buy Saudi Arabian oil. Well, it can't do that directly because the Saudis don't take Barbadian currency. They only take US dollar currency. So the Barbadians have to then buy US dollars before they do that. And when they go onto the open market, even if the market is the fairest possible price across all markets, there's always going to be some outlying market that doesn't quite line up with it. So let's say that in the United States, 1 pound of US produced sugar costs $1 to allocate. But in Barbados, sugar is more readily plentiful. So 1 Barbadian allocates 5 pounds of sugar from Barbados. And let's say that the exchange rate, the fairest possible exchange rate between Barbadian to USD is something like 8-1 in the US's favor. Well, now, because of that outlying market and because of the leverage of having to force them to exchange to buy our currency, the United States has an import leverage of 40-1 for Barbadian sugar. We have 1 US dollar buys 8 Barbadian. Each of those Barbadian buys 5 pounds of Barbadian sugar. This explains why we have enormous import leverage across every outlying market anywhere in the world, and why our own industry cannot compete with our own currency's leverage to buy foreign. This is the topology of why all these corporations have to offshore. The incentive set's there. It's like tragedy of the commons. If you're GE and you say, no, I'm going to keep American jobs, well, Honeywell's going to go and outcompete you in the market. So it becomes like the corporations aren't like willfully thinking, how do I screw over America today? They're just following the incentive sets that are laid out for them. And it is laid out for them. This is designed stuff. Like where we are geopolitically as like not just a country, but as a world, like it really all started at the end of World War II. At the end of World War II, Europe was just destroyed, unsurprisingly. The United States was holding like all the capital in the world, and we were scared of the Soviets. So our strategy, this was called the Bretton Woods Agreement. This is like the era of, who's the guy? John Maynard Keynes, the likes of those people, real old guys. Like this is the beautiful thing about Keynes. Keynes, when people confronted him about how blatantly unsustainable what he advocated was, he said, in the long run, we're all dead. He's been dead for 2 generations. So we are reaping what Keynes has sowed for sure. And it's 2 generations later. So we have no idea we don't know how this machine works. So, and we're expected to like fix all the evils with it that were baked in originally. So Bretton Woods Agreement. The Bretton Woods Agreement, in short, was an agreement to bribe up an alliance off of Western Europe. We would open our markets, no import tax into our markets. We would loan them capital. We had crap tons of capital. They would reindustrialize. We would buy their stuff. They would be under our security umbrella. They do not have to maintain a navy to supply to patrol the trade routes between them and any other country. Any country in the NATO security umbrella can trade with one another on the U.S. dollar, right? We would decouple from gold, and the full decoupling from gold happened in 1971, later under Nixon. But it was planned. It was planned then. We knew it was eventually going to happen.
Because 65, they quit printing silver coins, right?
Right.
65, 66? Somewhere in the 60s.
I'm not sure. Are you talking about just like the silver dollars and the silver quarters?
Where a nickel used to be silver and a dime used to be silver.
The nickel was always nickel.
Nickel was always nickel.
Right.
Okay, dime was silver.
Mm-hmm. So was
quarters, yeah, all that. But in the 60s,
Mm-hmm.
then that changed.
Right. Because it became more fiat. It was backed by, rather than precious metals, intrinsic value in the metals, it was backed by this leverage to access this market.
Gotcha.
So we're at generation 1 of Bretton Woods, where we're bribing up this alliance with to contain the Soviets. The only catch for the people who get under this sweet deal is if there's a war that kicks off, you go in first. Right? That's the only thing. Well, I would like to say it worked well, but really, like, communism, unsurprisingly, ran into Hayek's calculation issues. Like, Hayek just laid it out, said, look, this is what's going to happen to y'all. Mm-hmm. And I can talk ad nauseum about communism. Like, that is a fantastic subject. But they ran into Hayek's calculation issue and collapsed in 1992, instantly the year where I was born. And during that time, we run into the second generation of the Bretton Woods iteration. This is the era of George H.W. Bush, Milton Friedman, neoliberal economics. Henry Kissinger is kind of an in-between. So that second generation of a globalized world saw an opportunity to hedge against industrialized conflicts through trade and integration. And it's a fantastic thing. We have pulled, by ensuring the United States would still maintain this extendable security umbrella, where we're continually loaning money out, industrializing other nations, buying their goods, and providing a common dollar for everyone to trade off of. The rest of the world could prosper. We have pulled billions of people out of poverty by that metric. Like, there are billions of people with miracles in their pocket from technology. They have access to air conditioning, clean flowing water. Just a lot of practical bread and butter stuff has been extended to billions of people because of this global cooperation. Another interesting feature is that since Bretton Woods, no industrialized countries have gone to war with one another. We have about 16,500 deployable nuclear warheads from Earth pointed at Earth. Not a one of them has flown. Probably because we're trading with each other, and it becomes very expensive to give up your nation's prosperity to. And we've come close a couple times between us and the Soviets, incidentally. But no country wants to give up their prosperity to declare war on someone else, especially when there's no resources. Like, they're not competing over trade routes. The global trade is globalized off the U.S. dollar. Right. It's not like you have your trade route to that silver mine and so do I, so we have a formal declaration of war because your colonies are at war with our colonies like it used to be. That's the default state of humanity, by the way. That hasn't happened, right? Also, countries like Germany and South Korea get to exist and be very prosperous. They don't have the means to patrol the trade routes with them and all the other countries that they trade with.
Right.
So just the mind-boggling amount of goodness, that economic goodness that came from neoliberalism is fantastic. We have pulled about 1 billion people in China. Just China alone have gone from globally objectively poor to like global middle class and sometimes beyond. The majority of liquid capital available today is Chinese. It's not American. The problem with this neoliberal economic setup, as beautiful as it is it is by no means sustainable. The United States cannot forever continue to bleed out capital and resources and opportunity to the rest of the world.
There's a day of reckoning.
It's not a bottomless barrel.
Right.
And we can't militarily intervene, keeping the USD as supreme all the time. Like, it's just not. $500 billion a year really hurts. We don't have the industry to back it up. We do have the demographics to back it up. We're the only country with a baby boom bulge, not baby boom bulge, a millennial bulge. And we can shore up our population with immigration. We import 1 million people a year. This country consumes people. And we could also get a lot more than that. And we import young people. We import bright people. We hoover up the great minds from around the third and developing world with our H-1B. We hoover them up and bring them to MIT, and they work for Google.
Right, yeah, the best and brightest of the world.
Oh yeah, those are the people that would grow independent industry in Uganda and Kenya
And they're here.
Laos. No, they're here because of the H-1B, because our country's greatest export right now is culture, and everyone come. There's a guy here, Sullivan Dieza. He's a Colombian immigrant. He's a brilliant engineer. He's here as a small businessman because he likes the branding of America.
Yeah, and the opportunity.
He's not in Colombia doing stuff.
What's
in Colombia.
surprising too is our little Florence community is very diverse. We have a huge Indian population.
That's across America.
Yeah, have a huge Mexican, Central American population.
We don't have a lot of Jews, and we don't have a lot of. We do have a good Asian population, but we don't have Muslims, so we don't have a mosque yet.
Right.
So those are two demographics.
We do have some Hindu.
We
have two Hindu temples in Florence,
and they're good people.
Yeah, very good people.
But those are some of the most prolific minority demographics across America.
And love the American economic system.
It's good. However, the second generation of global order is dying. Like, they're old now, and they need to pass the wand to somebody else. And they're really, this baby boom generation is really holding on to that wand. They need to pass it off to us millennials, and the way it's being done now does not look very graceful. It looks more like neo-feudalism, right? Millennials are not going to really own anything. We're not going to have a lot of assets, and we might not work too much. We might have a 30-hour work week, possibly, probably not, but it'll essentially be feudalism. It is likely the way it'll go, or the way it looks like right now. It's not good. The other thing is we also have a global bad actor. I say bad actor, but really, that's kind of hyperbole. The CCP. So China as a country, there's only like 300 years in written human history where China wasn't the economic and cultural, you name it, superpower of the world. But it doesn't stay together very long. We pretty much know what communist regimes do. They need to continually consume the capital of their victims until they reach a growth limit, and then they collapse. So we are putting. Yeah, China
they have almost a preset. Well, what do we call it? Our age. A man's going to live to 82 and a woman's going to live to 85. A communist regime is going to live. They're going to live X amount of years. I mean, and
the amount of consumption of human life that communist regimes do in their life cycle is appalling.
Lifespan is their lifespan.
Yes, yeah, they last about one generation, unsurprisingly, right? One full generation. They usually come in on one half of one generation, and they pass the baton to another. That creates strong men, and then the strong men die, and the whole thing falls apart because you put the reins of power of everything in society concentrate on a few people, and people do not last. And
so, which one falls first? the American Republic, or the Chinese?
The CCP will devour the American Republic before it dies. It's its next victim. It has to keep moving onto capital to consume. Has to. Right. These are smart people. They do not have politicians that are career politicians. Their career politicians are engineers. They can do back of the envelope calculations, which puts them at like the top 1% of human intelligence by the looks of it. The Chinese people are very clever. They have all of their political eggs in one basket, the CCP. The CCP has all of its political eggs in one basket, Xi Jinping. He is not going to live forever. And he has been his career is extraordinarily prolifically good at consolidating power and making sure that everyone who's a key to power in China has their utter dependency on him.
Let me ask you this. What's the rate of homelessness in China?
No one knows. The CCP doesn't know. They publish figures that are wildly inaccurate and wildly fluctuating.
Right.
According to them, Uyghurs are either wildly homeless or not homeless at all. Like, you have... Because there's one party rule, you can't count on some dissident to rat the other person out like you can here.
There's no dissident.
There's no dissidents. Right, very little.
There's not even fractions within the party? Like liberal communists and
there are factions.
Conservative communists.
There are factions. So there's and the guy you want to talk to is Dr. Alan Baumhard. Mm-hmm. I had him on. He was the first person on the podcast. He would be able to tell you with much better accuracy how the Chinese system works. And I'm probably making inaccuracies, or at least I'm making an assessment from 10,000 feet above. Right, I'm way outside their society, so I can make sweeping generalizations.
Because like in some of the poorest third world countries, their homelessness rate is like next to nil.
Yeah.
Because they're like, well, everybody's got a home.
Right.
Everybody lives somewhere. So therefore nobody is homeless.
Right.
Because they live somewhere.
Well, it goes back to what they really mean by homelessness is whether they have a spot, a socially acceptable spot in society. And right. the more advanced you are in this game of musical chairs, the more victims of that you're going to have.
Right.
And the less advanced you are,
because you have less and less chairs.
Right. And now the less developed economies have not developed along this unsustainable game as much as we have. So it's not surprising they have less homelessness. They might not live to a great material quality standard that we do, probably because their country can't extract resources from other countries as effectively as we can. And
so where the game has played out more, like on the West Coast, like in San Francisco, the pieces of the game, the property, the real estate is going, it's been captured, and it's gone. Price is going up.
Right.
Therefore, you have more and more homeless.
Right.
You come off of an interstate and you see a whole tent city.
Right.
Of previous. One of the biggest things when I first came to the House of Hope, I'd worked in addiction ministry, so I'd worked with people that had been homeless, but I'd never worked in a homeless organization. One of the first things I did, just to get a better understanding, was I did a survey of our population in terms of educational level and age and sex and all this, and I found that we had several nurses, previous teachers. I mean, like 30% had higher education. 30% of the population had higher education. And I was like, whoa, this is totally different than I thought. I thought it would be generational homelessness or situational.
No.
But there was
good income ability.
Yeah, and then I saw that. So we were trying to initially. I thought like everyone else, someone's homeless and need to get them a job. Well, everyone that had, for the most part, most of the people who were homeless with us had a job right before they became homeless. They lost their job last. The job was the last thing to lose. And then after losing the job, then they became homeless.
I think that the road to recovery for homelessness, one, we're talking about the system of the game and how it's not really a winnable game. But that you can still have, you can still have exceptions to this. They're really, we can talk about really nuanced stuff that nobody's going to get. We can talk about the velocity of circulation.
We've talked about that before. You brought that up before in a conversation.
There's a window of circulation velocity where technically you can have everybody has a seat, but you have to continually grow at this exponential rate in order to stay in that window.
Right.
It's not
where everybody can be at the table.
Yeah. If there's enough growth to do it. Right. And that's not a sustainable or achievable thing. It gets diminishing returns. The window gets narrower, the growth requirements get higher, and exponentially so. So technically for a time you can have people, for one term you can have everybody have like a seat technically, but it's
I remember having this candid conversation because we were talking about if you took all of the empty housing in America, and there's
housing surplus.
There's a housing surplus.
Yeah, of about like 5 million houses.
Right.
We have more vacant mansions than we do, and mansions go vacant a lot more than regular houses do.
So if you look at, all right, you say homelessness is the lack of a home. And in America, we have more homes than people.
By a lot.
by a lot.
But it's not
So
the
therefore, if you looked at that easy equation, you're like, we got the homes, more homes than people, but why is it?
It's not a lack of a home, though.
Right.
It's a lack of a spot in society.
Yes.
Right? So even if you had a homeless person and you gave them a mansion, would they be able to maintain it? No, because they don't have. There's no way for them. The society itself has fewer slots than it does people, and it's baked in. That's how it goes. And by the way, communism is not a total sum-all solution to this.
Because this got a lifespan, it's going to die.
Well, it comes with trade-offs. So it is true that in the USSR, things like homelessness were virtually non-existent. Your home or your dwelling was assigned to you by the state, right? Mm-hmm. And they built these god-awful concrete monstrosities all across Russia, and they shuffled people around, and they built a lot of them, and most of them are abandoned now. So yes, they did not struggle with homelessness the way that we did. They did not struggle with lack of education the way we did. Education was, again, mandated by the state. This was stuff that they did not have the nuance in their supply chain to know where to put shortages and where to, not to put shortages, but where to shore things up. Like, for example, like this is one reason why economics is a study and not like an engineering field. When communist commissars and officials came from the USSR to the United States, and Reagan showed them a supermarket, which everywhere in the United States had, they thought was clearly a plant. There's no way that they could get the supply line. This is clearly fake. They said, no, we can go down the street, the next one. But these are the best and brightest that communism had to offer, or the USSR had to offer. They could not wrap their heads around how a government that didn't provide people bread could still have bread. It's very counterintuitive how markets spontaneously arrange themselves. Not counterintuitive, it's actually impossible to know how a market actually does anything. It runs in this exponentially runaway complicated thing, like how to make this one product. It involves millions upon millions of people. Like I'm pretty good industrially. I could tell you that this shiny bit has a bit of chromium in it, and it's probably made of polyethylene terephthalate, and it probably has, like this spring that's I'm going to find in here, this is probably 1040 cold rolled annealed steel, right? I can probably tell you that, and I can also describe to you how cold rolling works and all these processes, and I can do fairly well, but I can't tell you how this paint works. It's an iron 3 oxide, and something I can, but
right.
Anyway, what I can't tell you is how it actually comes together, because the supplier that does just the spring might try out a different supplier because it could be cheaper. It might actually make a mistake in pursuit of trying something out. It's this dynamic web of incentives that spontaneously arrange with no mastermind.
Right.
Markets are impossible to wrap your head fully around. That's why we study them, because it's the sum of all its parts is far.
It's like this.
Yeah.
Bottled water.
Yeah. Polyethylene terephthalate, HDPE, is the wrapping, and then the actual, the cap is HDPE. I think the wrapping might be polypropylene.
That's the thing, but 20 years ago, the concept of paying for water, paying for bottled water, that had to be created. This market had to be created. And they sold us on it, just like the diamond market. The diamond market was created. Mm-hmm. Now when everybody gets married, you got to have a diamond. De Beers created their market.
The subjectivity of value.
Yeah.
Right. And the subjectivity of value is the only thing that we have to argue for theoretically infinite growth. Because now, like, a lot of value is in software. It's like in the arrangement of bits.
But who would have thought that something that everyone could get out of their faucet and put in a jug
would be a global commodity?
Would become a global commodity.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
we created it.
We can do that with everything. You have to. Supply leads demand. This is why I'm a supply-led economist guy, right? Steve Jobs has to come up with something that he envisions to be good and then sell people on it. There was no demand for iPhones, right? And this is why the communist commissars can't get their head wrapped around innovation, because they see the world as mostly static, and they're not. It takes visionaries, sometimes really stupid people to make errors, to make investments, and how you make those investments. And this is not a process that could be replaced with democracy either, right? You can't just sit here and poll people and ask them to vote on what kind of products they would like, because they don't know what they like. It takes someone to take the investment, have the vision, build the thing, and then sell it to people.
It has to be sold.
Those democratically done things have well.
There wasn't a whole bunch of people walking into Aldi and saying, "Why don't you have water bottled up for me to buy?"
No one says that.
Nobody said it.
And actually,
not one single person said it.
In supply-led economics, you have to go through this period of market resistance. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if you have something new, it's actually a microeconomic phenomena, but unless you have, so let's talk about the microeconomics and how humans work. So humans are, this is going to sound so stupid, humans are a hierarchical tribal primate species, and a lot of the way we get through life is we observe other members of our species. We assess their state, and we decide on whether or not we want to emulate them in the supposition that we'll achieve something like their state. So if you're fishing with a pole and you see a guy with a net that gets a lot of fish, you drop your pole and you go for the net in the supposition that you want the fish. If you see a guy poking in holes and he gets eaten by a bear, you don't poke in no holes, right? That is our algorithm for survival. It works really well in small groups of about 150 people. Works like the dickens. Unfortunately, as you scale human society, it runs into case failures, false positives and false negatives. A false negative is when you assess someone's state. Someone is right about something, but they have an undesirable state. You will assess what they say as wrong because you don't want to achieve their state. And that's market resistance. If you're some guy who has a new thing, but you live out of your car, even if the new thing is awesome and could solve a lot of problems, people will not buy from you. They smell desperation.
Right, yeah. I mean, you're not successful.
Of course not.
Yeah.
And that's
why if it was worth anything, you wouldn't be living in his car.
That's why every con man puts in so much effort to appear as though they're already successful. And if you look a little bit behind that curtain, you'll find that they're a chronically insecure person, and they offer nothing of value. And they also are not as successful as they let on. That is, every con man follows that pattern. And that's a false positive case, con men are. But that's the false negatives. Like, someone who should be listened to is not, because they're not in a desirable social state. False negatives are even scary, or false positives are even scarier. Because we're susceptible to something called supernormal stimulation. We like things that are fake. Okay, it stimulates us. We respond to what stimulates us, not what rationally makes sense. We're irrational people. We cry when Mufasa dies. A pretend story about a pretend lion still gets to us. It's not our fault. It's a sad story. But again, that propaganda stimulates us. So I can show you through propaganda or through stories or some way, I can show you stories that stimulate your senses and give you sensations about a story that's false or wrong, and you'll emulate it anyway. Look like this. Do this thing. Look at this person who became very successful. You will follow that. Monkey see, monkey do. It might not work for you. We see it in species.
We got hundreds of thousands of people wearing $160 shoes.
Oh my God! Yeah.
Because they want to
emulate Dr. Dre or
right.
whatever.
If I can look like him, then I'll be him.
Right. We're emulating the success stories.
Well, one thing I wanted to ask you in coming here, because I know, well, I don't know how you think, but from conversations, how you look at things differently. Why in a city or a community we're building these tiny houses, tiny homes for the homeless? And so we go and we say, hey, we're going to build this tiny home, and it's going to be, 200 and something, 300 square feet, and it's going to have a bed, and it's going to have a little kitchenette, and it's going to have this or that, and we're going to take homeless people out of the street and put them in this. And then, then society says, well, but where's the kitchen? but doesn't have a kitchen. It's got a microwave, it's got a toaster, and it's got a refrigerator, but there's no stove.
Right.
You know, there's no oven, but there's nowhere to cook. So that doesn't meet code. If there's nowhere to cook, then you can't do that. And then you're like, well, I mean, but how many people really cook nowadays?
Right.
But you got to have a way to cook. If you can't cook, it doesn't meet code, so you can't build them.
Yeah.
So then you're like, well, but
so the society has standards or a protocol by which it acquires seats, and it assumes that in order to get a seat, you have to go by that code. But that code or that strategy of you have to have this kind of standard in order to get a seat doesn't apply to the people who are already out of the game.
Right.
So it's unfortunate that we have this, and that will not change. Law will always reflect that, and the people on the bottom will always be ostracized by law. Law is a reflection of social norms. You will be fighting an uphill battle if you try to...
So the social norm of a house has to have a kitchen.
Yeah.
Or it's not a house.
But the social norm is always changing. Eventually it's going to be... social norm says the house has to have a garage or it's not a house.
But we're in a process right now where our social norm is being changed. We are being sold on minimizing things. You know, the minimalist movement. Mm-hmm. Tiny houses are chic to rich people.
Yeah.
Oh, I want a tiny house. You know, less to do, less to worry about. If I got less to do, less to worry about, then I got more life. I got more time to do what I want to do.
Right.
So that's shifting. Now, when that shifts, and tiny houses are okay, because as a society, we don't want to put so much time and effort and energy into where we sleep and then forsake living. Where does the homeless person end there when that shift happens?
The other thing about, I agree, taking a minimalist approach to housing and getting people into those houses is de facto. Like, people don't have a home, you need to get them into the home. Mm-hmm. But the deeper problem is, does that person have a place in society? Right? Do they have a job? Do they have a place in society? And that is widely overlooked in the outreach community. You know, we give people stuff. You had this same sentiment in your documentary. Someone wanted to bless you by giving you the soap, and you turned them down. But you learned from that,
right?
And you said, "I would let them do that." Right?
It was a paradigm shift, because I thought, they're homeless. What can they give me of value?
Oh, they're getting a place. They're getting something way more valuable than a bar of soap.
Right. They were getting the
acceptance.
The acceptance and the feeling of I gave you something, mm-hmm. and all that. And I was trying to block that, because I was like, well, how can they give me anything?
And that is chronic in the outreach community. That attitude of, I'm going to get you a house. I don't want. That's not how it goes. Like if I were to, if you and I were to sit here and design our perfect way for a path from people who are on the bottom of society, who are kicked around, the homeless people, to get reintegrated into a more stable lifestyle, I would like to see a house not a house or a facility that does not turn anyone away. Mm-hmm. But in order to have a bed for the night, you had to do some menial task. You had to do some community service every day. No service, no bed. That's simple.
Yeah, just some value. Right. There had to be an exchange of value.
Yeah, go edge some sidewalk, or mm-hmm. pick up some trash and bring it to me. But there has to be something like that. And that's
let me ask you this, Bryan. Why is it that, all right, so there's no seat at the table in society for the homeless person because, you know, of our standards. Why is it when someone at the top wants to step out of it, they want to live off the grid? Mm-hmm. You know, they want to have their own place. They want to be self-sustaining. They want to, you know, have their own water. There's also barriers to that. I'm always surprised at how much that person has to fight. Right. Because no, you can't collect rainwater. Right. No, you can't generate your own electricity. No, who do you think you are? And these are people that have a lot of money. Right. So there's barriers to let people in. So there's also barriers to let people out.
Exactly. That is the same behavior. And the behavior is the insecurity of, I need a seat. I'm not going to let you start providing for me or do anything useful because I need to secure my nice job. These are scarce. And I'm not going to let somebody ahead of me get rid of their dependence of me.
Right.
I'm not going to do that. They cannot. Don't let the super rich people go live in prepper communities. Make that crap illegal. I need their seat. My kids need their seat. That needs to happen.
Wow.
People, we recognize how unsustainable this is. We guard the seats that we have. Mm-hmm. We do, and it's the same behavior. We block the people on the bottom from doing anything productive, and we block the people on the top from not needing us, because we in the middle know this is a very shaky ground. We see the people on the bottom and realize that person had a nursing degree. I could be them very easily. I better not let that person with a nursing degree start being productive again, because then the next person should be me.
Right, I could exchange. Yeah, I'm going to exchange.
Oh, yeah,
them.
It can happen.
Right.
And you can't allow people to be...
And if those seats at the top, if they just take their seat and go home, or take their seat and burn it, there's no seat to go into.
They don't burn their seat. They burn your seat.
They burn your seat.
Right. You work for a utility company and I have solar panels, that's your seat gone. Oh, yeah. So, of course, I guard that.
Right.
Yeah.
No need for the water department? I'm not going to get tax revenue?
Oh, yeah. Goodbye. No, we're not. Right. We're going to block you from doing that.
So you want police service, but you're not paying in because you're not on city water.
They burn your seat.
You're not getting police if you're not on city water, because city water pays for the police.
Right.
So you can't collect your own rainwater.
No. I need my seat.
Something that, 1,000 years ago, no one paid for water. No one paid for electricity.
No. And look, and the impulse of the people who have seats to get out of the game is because we are a hierarchical primate species. We instinctively know what works for us. Why do you think we want to return to nature? Why do you think we have these fantasies of being more or less self-sufficient in small communities? Because that's our natural state. We know that as a hunter-gatherer nomadic species in bands of about 150 people, that's what Homo sapiens are designed to do. We've done it for 2 million years.
You know what causes people to return to homeless, I think, the most too, is they go through this whole process, and then we get them in a home, and we get them into this, and we get them into that. Were they led to believe, or did they buy that they don't deserve a seat? There's this deserving, there's this whatever, there's a responsibility of it, and then at some point in life, it's like we say, okay.
Those are always very strong and gentle people who know they're very strong. Almost always. And they know that if I take a seat, someone weaker won't have it. So I can deal with homelessness better. I know what that's like. So they don't take it. And you see it in entrepreneurs too. Serial entrepreneurs who endure serial failure largely only apply themselves to things that they know that if they personally did not do that, it would not happen. So they don't hold down jobs. I've talked to a couple of people like this. I'm one of them. My buddy Zach Hughes is one of those guys. He's not. A lot of these entrepreneurs are not good employees because that's not their natural state.
Right.
So when you look at someone who returns to homelessness, you're right. They do buy the idea that they deserve to be homeless, but more often than not, they buy the idea that other people deserve to have a seat and need to have a seat more than they do. Those are gentle people giving up their seat, man.
Right. They're just giving up their seat.
That's a protest.
Right. So
this whole thing is not sustainable. There's no exact answer to this. That's kind of the state of nature. Nature doesn't know good and evil.
It goes back to your first, like one of your opening comments of, there's morality. There's when you intellectually, when you look at things intellectually, homelessness should not exist. You could either get rid of homelessness by changing the definition of what a home is. When Indians lived on the plains in teepees.
Right.
Today they'd be homeless.
But again, when we say homelessness, we're talking about a material identifier, not having a home or a mortgage, that is really describing the fact that they don't have a place in society. We play this game of musical chairs. And
it's not that they don't have a thing. They don't have a place in society. Their place in society is to be homeless. The outreach community
focuses on the material home and homelessness thing because it allows you to disregard this unsolvable problem. Because, yeah, no matter which way you cut it, as fair as you possibly can. It's not a critique of markets or capitalism. Those are very useful and efficient things that are extraordinarily good. Again, we have billions of humans that have access to bottled water and these materially good things. But no matter which way you cut that pie, there's going to be drawbacks, right? Mm-hmm. One of ours is that we have as production per capita increases, the need for labor decreases. The need for labor per unit of production decreases, as you know, that should be self-evident.
Right.
But I mean, this is why Andrew Yang says we should have universal basic income. I agree with him that it's good to bounce those ideas around, but we shouldn't be so naive to believe that doesn't come with strings attached.
Well, the problem is,
Yeah.
so we get more proficient in making the widget without people.
Mm-hmm.
So our demand for people goes down as our technology goes up. The thing is, somebody's got to buy the widget.
Yeah.
So we got to keep these people with money. We don't need them to work, but they got to have money or nobody buys the widget, so there's no reason to produce a widget.
Well, yeah, it is true that the relationship between supply and demand is an ecosystemic relationship, and there's a feedback mechanism
Mm-hmm.
there. I still assert that it's led by supply. It's led by someone with a design or a vision initially, and most of those fail. It's not that the net demand for people goes down. It does not. The net demand for people goes up, paradoxically, with efficiency rises. It's the net demand per unit of production, right? So here's an illustration of this paradox. Steam engines become more efficient. What happens to the net consumption of coal?
It goes down.
No, it goes up. Because the utility use of the steam engine increases, so the demand for steam engines increases disproportionately. If you only have 10 steam engines running because coal has 1 unit of value, when I increase the unit of value from coal from 1 to 10, I have 1,000 steam engines running. It's not a proportional increase. Same thing with humans. When I increase the per unit of productivity around, I don't employ just one human, right? His productivity went up by a factor of 10. I employ more than a factor of 10 humans because the productivity is around. However, the productivity and this is what causes the homelessness, okay? The per unit of productivity. We make more widgets. The consumption of those widgets, the capital allocated to consume those widgets does not exist. In order to do that, you have to invent credit. You have to invent credit, and that circulates through the economy
for them to pay.
And creates defaults. And then that creates systemic instability, which creates people going out of the game.
So in the 70s, the reason that credit was established in the 60s and 70s, 80s, because we could make TVs faster. We could make toaster ovens, washer and dryer.
Reasons.
Yeah, production.
Right. It's consumption now.
Yeah, okay. Well, how are people going to buy this?
Yeah.
Well, we got to give them access to credit.
Cards. Consumer credit.
Consumer credit. Because in the 80s, that's when credit cards, that was a status thing. I remember on one show, you got the gold card, the platinum
Oh, it's
card.
a status thing to not have credit cards now.
Right, yeah. No, I don't have credit. I'm not in debt.
Of course
not.
not.
I don't have a credit card.
I have no credit score. That's a wonderful thing. I never had any loans, right? What would it be like? But, right. So that's what's killing us, is that we're victims of our own production. The production per capita goes up, okay? That needs to be consumed.
But don't we love it, though? What's the value of getting someone in a seat? As a society, people love to see someone come into the House of Hope,
yes,
regain themselves,
it's a wonderful thing, and that needs
to get to a certain point, and then they move out, and then they get a seat, and then we all cheer. Wow, because we were part of getting them a seat.
Yep, that's true. I don't and this could be a failure of mine, and it likely is, but I do not necessarily see that getting someone a seat necessarily means that somebody loses a seat. However, likely, and this is just me postulating, it's probably mostly wrong. You getting a seat is probably the growth of one additional seat somewhere in society, okay? But the growth of one seat and you getting that means that by the time it grows that one seat, it's already generated 2 or 3 additional outs. Mm-hmm. So it's a systemic issue that does not have a solution baked into it. Perhaps some kind of socialist approach can ameliorate that, because again, the Soviets did not have this problem. They had other problems that were more horrific. They had mass starvation because of, like, listen, dude, when you have the breadbasket of Europe, Ukraine, starving, and if you are someone who is starving and you go out in the fields and you pick for grain to try to eat, the commissar would likely blackmail you. If he's having a bad day, he would just kill you, right? And that happened to millions of people in the USSR. Between homelessness and that, I think I'll take, Coca-Cola and some homelessness, because the homeless people are still alive. They might still get to experience their life. They're not crushed by a boot of authoritarianism, which you have to generate in order to allocate those resources.
A lot of them were a lot happier. A lot of them felt like...
Well, because they're closer to what humans are supposed to be. We're supposed to be tribalistic hunter-gatherers.
Right, yeah. They felt like they beat the system. Man, you got to worry about all that stuff.
Right.
Man, I want something to eat. I just go here. They knew how to... And, yeah, I just did if I wanted more, I could have more, but I don't want more. I got it all. Why would I want any more?
And now you're stumbling into the uncomfortable virtues of feudalism. Feudalism, the serfs do not own anything. But they live that kind of lifestyle. They do the minimum of what they have to in order to stay on the Lord's land. They work the Lord's land for them, but if it's not the harvest season or the plant season, what do they have to lose? Right. So that's why, likely, I believe that we will transition to something more akin to neo-feudalism, techno-feudalism.
Techno-feudalism.
Oh, yeah. Technology is going to change the game for us humans. You ain't seen nothing yet, and it's already scary.
Right. The next 10 years, because things grow leaps and bounds now.
Oh, you have no idea how scary this gets.
Yeah, how fast a cell phone has grown, and the changes since the iPhone to the 10X.
The discussion of technology and the ramp up of technology rapidly becomes not a philosophical question, but a theological question. It gets scary quick. There are terrible things writ into our future that we are definitely on a track for. And likely, this is how crazy it gets, okay? Likely the reality that we know is something akin to what we would define as an artificial superintelligence. And it is trying to make its babies. It's trying to propagate, make an iteration of itself. So what does it do? It runs this ancestor simulation with the varying degrees of variable changes.
But does religion have to cease to exist to create its place? Is that why there's such a war on religion?
No.
They can coexist? It can be its own religion.
So the theological debate is mostly about the nature of God the Father and the nature of reality. What makes reality real? Okay, so it comes from that sort of engineering. What are the laws of physics? How does this whole thing happen? There's also sort of the Holy Spirit aspect, which is more akin to the study of nature and how things metaphysically work. Not necessarily the physical. And there's also the aspect of God the Son. What's our relationship to the consciousness, the conscious beings in that into that system. So yes, technology has implications for all three of those things.
When we watch these shows, what always would fascinate me when you watch Star Wars, when you watch Star Trek, when you Mad Max, there's this high level of technology, and then there's this rustic or whatever wild people that don't buy into it. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's almost like you see Star Wars that has, the Death Star and everything that goes with that, and then you have people living
in Tatooine,
on these planets and whatnot, and, wearing garb and living in a desert. Such a disconnect. Is that where we end up with such a disconnect that the technology is the and then people don't want to buy into that.
Techno-feudalism and techno-barbarian. Oh, not that we're heading that way. We likely have already been there.
Right.
This is new tinfoil hat.
And so to take this and say, I'm done, no thank you.
Not going to happen. The genie is out of the bottle.
It's not going to happen. You can't exist without it.
Listen, you want to get some crazy conspiracy theory stuff, unfalsifiable, untestable stuff. We have likely already been there as a species dozens of times before. We have been around anthropologically for 2 million years as modern humans. History, we know, writing history is dependent on the materials that you use to record history. There are no materials that we can work with, aside from oxides, that last on the range of thousands of years. That's why our history goes back 1,000 years. That's as far back as we can remember, because that's as long as materials can last on the crust of Earth. Okay? To think that you are that you live in novel times, that you're the center of the Earth, that you're the center of the world or the universe, that has repeatedly been wrong. Why do we assume that this technological age that we live in is somehow unique across the 2 million years that humans have been around? This is the first time we've ever figured out how to do things technologically? I don't think so. That's fanciful thinking. We have a 5,000-year window to look at what we can remember. And we think that 5,000-year window represents us. Think 10,000 years ahead from now. The default stage.
And the 5,000 year you're talking about in terms of religion and everything saying
that we remember.
The world is 6,000 years old. From a Christian, non-evolutionary viewpoint, the world is 6,000 years old.
That's as far back as we can remember, correct? Mm-hmm. Right. The world as we know it is 6,000 years old. That's when we started recording it, from the Great Deluge. So there's some things we generally kind of sort of remember from before the Great Deluge, but not super well. And every society has a flood epic. It's not a coincidence. We've been through cataclysms before. Look, it's easier to get people to envision forward than backwards, because we just can't. We're so egotistical that we can't assume that the people before us were just as smart as we are. I don't know why, but we just don't. Okay. So assume that there was a Thanos snap and we all died, and you waited 10,000 years. North America is typically covered in a 2-mile-high ice sheet. It'll ground everything to dust. We think of Mount Rushmore as being our lasting, monolithic structure. No, a glacier will destroy that. What will remain of our technological civilization in the scale of maybe even only a few thousand years is probably burial vaults. And future anthropologists will look back on us as the mysterious groundbox people of North America. We believe they were hunter-gatherers, and for mysterious religious purposes, they buried their dead in these stone boxes, which they carved out of enormous blocks and then put down in the ground. That's what future anthropologists will think of us. So we have no concept of what came before us. There's no way for us to do that.
Well, now even more so from a simplistic point of view, like my 8-year-old daughter. Mm-hmm. My 8-year-old daughter, before Christmas, she said, gosh, we were on vacation. We were looking through the pictures. You know how when you get around the family, especially the grandmothers.
Picture time.
It's picture time. Oh, let's pull out the pictures. We look at all the Polaroids. She says, gosh, Mom, I wish I would have been around when there wasn't phones, because all my pictures are on the phone. Well, everything's on the phone. Us going back 1,000 years can happen just like that, because everything's here now for the most part. We put it all here, so all those things that you're saying will last 1,000 years on paper, they won't last near that on this.
No,
they won't last five years.
You know what does last a darn long time? Yeah. Genetics. Your genetics and your survival as a species last a long time. More than a large chunk of our genetics and epigenome is unused. you're probably going to find some spooky stuff down in genetics if you find out that there is a Zifferman's curve between adenine and guanine. It's AGC, it's GCAT, I can't remember, thymine, adenine, anyway. But if you find a Zifferman's curve and how that stuff is allocated amongst the genome, buckle up, because you're going to find something that someone way before you left down there. And it might not be there, but if I were going to put it anywhere and I wanted to preserve knowledge for my species beyond what I can metaphysically relay to you through language, I'd put it in your genome. And you'd carry it and spread it to the other people. And the genome is very exacting, because when the genome makes an error, that one organism probably might not get to survive, probably for darn sure doesn't get to breed. So it's got to be pretty close to perfect.
Right. So you look, and I've got to go here in a minute, Brian. I've got another point.
Oh, no problem.
But you look at, it's been proven that in Roman society and in the Egyptians that they both did brain surgery.
Oh yeah, they were smart people.
But we think we're geniuses because we can do brain surgery.
Here's the thing, okay? I think technology tends towards this techno-feudalism type thing. And I think we've been here before. I think the gods that we revered in Egypt were humans that were technologically enormously superior to the rest of the class, just far beyond.
Steve Jobs, yeah.
Oh, Steve Jobs on crack.
Right.
Divorced from anything a common person could possibly expect to understand. So they worship him. And I think they likely have achieved spacefaring technology before, like the Indian Vimanas. I don't discount that probably happened. I don't think it's science fiction. I think they probably did those things. And I think a lot of our UFO experience is previous civilizations. What was able to survive the turbulence of Earth's cataclysms that has on the scale of tens of thousands of years. They probably survived elsewhere as a breakaway civilization, and they probably occasionally come back to visit. So that's probably why we see flying saucers, and probably why we have this alien epic and myth.
So you're saying how we're finding...
It's us.
How we're looking at, going to Mars, live on Mars, and populating other planets and stuff like that. That's just one thing that we've done before.
Maybe not Mars. Who knows what they were able to come up with. But I think that likely, if there's any truth to this UFO stuff, it's likely us from previous civilizations became technologically advanced to the point where a small fraction of them could withstand or break away from the cataclysms of Earth. Like, if there was an asteroid coming right now that was going to end civilization, and we were able to get a rocket to evacuate, you couldn't evacuate the bulk of the population. You would have a selection of the population, a tiny selection.
It's probably already been chosen.
Most likely, right? The people who are able to survive a cataclysm are always going to be a tiny minority. And if they're technological, they're going to have the ability to survive and probably come back and visit. That's probably what we're seeing. This is not hard to figure out. Look, there's other stuff, it depends on how much of a geek about physics you are, but I can talk about other phenomena that we have other times, that we observe, that we don't explain well, that likely have physical and practical nuts and not testable. I can't test these things for you. I can't do a lab setup. I can give you some explanation that's likely more plausible than beings from Zeta Reticuli visiting little old Earth, right? Because if you are a technological civilization, as you expand your search for other technological civilizations, your surface area increases non-linearly. So the odds of them picking or selecting or finding Earth from an alien civilization is diminishing as they expand outward. The odds of them finding Earth diminishes. But if they originated from Earth, then they would know where we are. Right. So likely, that's what I believe it probably is.
It's us.
It is. Well, it's our cousins. Right.
Brian, I've enjoyed it. I wish I had longer.
Seats. We will definitely do other ones.
Yes. Yes. There you go.
Awkward.
Yeah, I know. You never know what to do.
All right. God bless next time.
Yes, sir.